Auditor General's report. This big thing did very little to calm any lingering fears Canadians may have about food safety in Canada in the aftermath of the XL food beef recall that was over a year ago. Michael Ferguson, who's on this program in a couple minutes, says the Canadian Food Inspection Agency doesn't routinely follow up on recalls and struggles with major cases. And he makes 4 key recommendations in the report. Check this out. 1, that companies should provide better information after recalls, that the CFIA should ensure recalled food is destroyed. The AG report also says food safety investigative policies should be updated, and the CFIA should clarify its policies for non-registered companies, who were over 70% of the recalls they looked at were from non-registered. What does this all mean for you, the consumer? Is Canada's food recall system really safe? Joining me now for some details on that, some MPs, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health, Eve Adams, is here, the NDP Agriculture Critic, Malcolm Allen is here, and the Liberal Health Critic, Hetty Fry, is here. Let's start from the opposition, and then we'll get the government response. Malcolm Allen, the Auditor General concluded that the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, quote, doesn't know that its recall activities are carried out across the country consistently and according to policies, procedures, and requirements. What concerns you about this?
Well, clearly that's a major failure, Evan, on behalf of CFIA. I mean, this is an agency that, going back to 2008, listeriosis crisis, it's been under review supposedly by this government and supposedly had resources thrown at it to try to make it better. And what we've seen from the Weatherall report of 2009, the XL report this spring, and now the Auditor General, is that they're still not capable of ensuring Canadians that when they have a recall, that when the product comes off of the shelf, where does it go? They can't tell Canadians where it went. And worse so, when they have a major crisis like the XL crisis, that they actually don't get to the root of the problem quickly enough. They don't actually get to the place where both are communicating the producer or the processor and CFIA so that they actually can get to what date should we actually recall to. We saw that last year when they literally spent days trying to figure out what product should we capture, what product should we hold. And so clearly that's a major failing for CFIA.
All right, but the Auditor General did say that the agency got top marks for a good job during the initial phases of a recall. And then the Minister of Health, Mr. Ambrose, stressed that the government spent $500 million on food safety. They say they've hired 750 new inspectors, and she basically says that these are administrative issues and there's no danger for Canadians. What do you say to that?
Well, I think the Auditor General actually disagrees with the Minister in his report when he talks about when we have a major recall, like XL last year, that the information flowing between, for instance, the information that went from XL to CFIA was in such a form that they had no idea what to do with it. That's CFIA, that is. They didn't know what to do with that information. It made no sense to them. Consequently, that recall was delayed by a number of days as they tried to decipher what exactly that information to them was. And so clearly we're seeing that the CFIA is still not performing to the expectations of Canadians.
Hetty Fry, what are your concerns raised from this report?
Well, my concerns are really, I agree with everything that the Auditor General said. We had been bringing this point forward over the last 8 years, starting with listeriosis and moving on. But what I think is at the heart of what the Auditor General said is that in spite of recommendations that were made in various reports for things that should be done, processes that should be followed, communications amongst all the stakeholders being an important one, they were never done. And we now see the Minister of Health assuring us that this is all going to be fixed and that now that CFIA is under Health Canada, that they're going to do what is necessary to be done. But they have not proven that they could do this in the past 8 years. And secondly, they have just cut 300 people from this year, laid off 300 people from the whole CFIA branch. So the question is, how can you do the things you want to do? I asked the Minister a question yesterday at committee about, is she going to train new people? Is she going to bring forward the kinds of resources and do what the recommendations say? And I didn't really get an answer. And that concerns me because this is inherent to the health of Canadians and to the safety of Canadians so that they can depend on the food they eat.
Eve Adams, the Auditor General, was very critical about what happens after the initial phase of a recall process and in emergency recalls. Very concerned and frankly doesn't trust the system. What do you say to that?
Actually, Evan, the Auditor General makes it very clear that Canada has an extremely effective system at getting rid of unsafe foods off of grocery shelves and in warning consumers very quickly about unsafe food.
But actually, I'll just read it. He says, the agency does not know what recall activities were carried out across the country consistently according to policies, procedures, and requirements. That's a quote.
So as I mentioned, actually, the Auditor General does clearly state that Canada effectively removes unsafe foods from grocery shelves, and that's what consumers, Canadian consumers, are most concerned about. I'm a mom. I think all Canadians have a very shared common goal here, and that is that the food that we purchase and serve to our family needs to be safe. Having said that, the Auditor General makes 11 recommendations, and we accept all of them. 5 of them will be implemented by Christmas. All 11 of them will be implemented by next spring. And as you indicated, most of these recommendations focus on what takes place after the recall. So from a consumer's perspective, a consumer will be notified of what the unsafe food is. That food will be removed from grocery shelves. And what we need to do, though, is improve largely administrative paperwork that's taking place after a recall.
Is it fair? I'm going to read some quotes. Is this fair to dismiss as paperwork? Quote, well, illnesses were contained in the recalls we examined. I, the Auditor General, am not confident that the system will always yield similar results. That's one. In terms of emergency recall, making sure the roles and responsibilities are clear. They're using a manual created in 2004. It's never been updated. So he's basically saying there are serious weaknesses in the system. How do you dismiss that as paperwork?
Well, Evan, yes, the manual that was written in 2004 does need to be updated, and that's paperwork that needs to be updated. And we accept these recommendations. But what Canadians need to know, and I hope that there's no fear-mongering taking place, that Canada has one of the safest and healthiest food systems in the world.
Okay, but I'm not trying to fearmonger. I'm reading from the Auditor General's report,
and that a manual in 2004 needs to be updated.
Well,
we accept that. We fully accept that.
You're focusing on that, but he's also saying that there's a weakness in the follow-up. What do you say to that?
In fact, all of the recommendations will be implemented. We take no issue with the recommendations. We all want to be assured that the foods that we're purchasing is safe. And our government is committed to that. I mean, our government has a very strong track record on this. We've hired 750 frontline food inspectors. We've invested over $500 million since taking office to improve Canada's food system.
Hetty Fry wants to jump in there. Hetty Fry?
Evan, I'm appalled at what I'm hearing, because the Auditor General is very clear. But what I keep saying is that this is not the first time that we've had reports pointing out the problems in the system, and they have not been rectified. And I think, when we talk about 2004, they are still updating. That is 9 years that they're taking to update processes. The follow-up is really disconcerting. And when we find out that follow-up within the first 30 days, only about 1/10 of the number of follow-ups occur, and the follow-ups are still going on 7 years later, you find they're taking anywhere between 80 days to 3 years to follow up. That means that we don't know what's out there in the system. That means that people cannot be sure that the food that they're eating is safe. And that, at the end of the day, is what the question should be.
Can I ask Malcolm Allen one question here? The audit noted that 70% of the 2010-2011 audits where sample recalls include products from firms that, quote, are not registered with CFIA. And that's because of a policy issue. I'll ask the Auditor General about this. They couldn't audit. It's a policy issue that they basically, CFIA has a tough time monitoring them. Do you think that needs to be changed? Should people be concerned about these smaller meat processing plants?
Yes.
Yeah, there's no question that we need to regulate so that people have an absolute insurance about the food safety system and the food they consume being safe. And I think that's a bit of a weakness in the system. But to the parliamentary secretary to suggest that it's a paper trail, that somehow we just have to do the paperwork. I mean, clearly that's not what the Auditor General is saying. He's saying the potential is there for risk and for people to get ill. But what's absolutely dismaying, Evan, is in 2009, this government said, through the Sheila Weatherall report, that we would do all of those recommendations which would fix the system. Their minister at the time, Minister Ritz, said we had completed all of those things. It turns out that's just not the case. The Auditor General has clearly shown there are still gaps in the system, and they're major ones. We spent days last year in the XL crisis not recalling beef when they should have. And that's a major incident that happened because of a system they have. And to recall food off the shelf and have no idea where it goes. You don't know if it went in the dumpster, was it destroyed, or did it find its way onto somebody else's shelf somewhere else?
Right.
They can't answer that question.
Okay, Eve Adams, you mentioned the Weatherall report. Let me just give some background. 2008, you remember the Maple Leaf Foods forced to recall 200 ready-to-eat meat products. 23 people died. Sheila Weatherall does a report and recommended 57 ways to improve food safety. Many of those recommendations never implemented. Why has it taken this Auditor General's report to finally get these recommendations done?
Well, as I indicated to you, though, just if I might back up, Canada's food safety system is considered world-class. We have some of the safest, healthiest food available around the world. But we're
talking about the Weatherall report,
yes,
and getting these things implemented.
We are committed to continuous improvement, and as I've clearly laid out for you, there are 11 recommendations here, and our timetable to implement them is clear. 5 of the 11 will be implemented by this Christmas. All 11 of them will be implemented by next spring. So I guess you're going to have me back on and hold my feet to the flames then. But I want to assure you that I want, just as you want, to know that the food that you serve your family is safe.
But you know, when you ask me to hold your feet to the flames on that, you know many people are going to say, why is it taking so long? The Weatherall report was from a 2008 incident. Why has it taken this to finally get your feet to the flames?
Well, Evan, in fact, we've invested over $500 million in food safety. I don't think anyone would say that we're not taking this issue seriously. We've hired 750 new frontline food inspectors. We've toughened penalties for companies. We want to make sure that the Canadian consumer always comes first.
I got to leave it there. Eve Adams, Malcolm Allen. Hetty Fry, I appreciate that as we talk about the food issues raised by the Auditor General's report. Thanks to all 3 MPs.